Merry Trekmas. If I had a nickel for every time one of my favorite TV shows did an episode about a 20th century capitalist with a terminal disease who froze themselves so they could be woken up in the future and then cured, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's still weird that it happened twice, right? Am I right? Anybody? In 1988, the first season of The Next Generation aired their finale called The Neutral Zone that featured a B-plot in which the Enterprise finds 3 cryogenically frozen passengers from the 20th century who all had incurable diseases, at least at that time. Among the frozen passengers is a self-important business dick named Ralph Offenhouse. He is, of course, in for a rude awakening when he finds out that the future is very different from the world in which he went into cryogenic stasis. In fact, all 3 characters are really there not as fully realized people, but as arguments for which the show can argue against to say that the future envisioned by Gene Roddenberry is a better one in all of the ways in which it is different from the world we currently live in now. Mr. Offenhouse has to come to terms with this and go on a journey of self-discovery to figure out how he's going to fit in to this new world. 14 years later, Futurama aired an episode called Future Stock, in which Fry walks into a cryogenic support group and runs into an 80's business guy who has bone-itis, a very tragic and hilarious disease. Now, 80's guy is everything that Fry isn't. Fry latches onto him immediately as not only someone who is from his own time period and understands all of the culture that Fry is used to, but as someone who was aspirational in Fry's own time. This guy is the kind of person Fry would have looked up to while he was pinching pennies on his pizza route. First, let's talk about the similarities. Now, I already mentioned that they both feature 20th century capitalists, frozen, blah, 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 blah. But after they wake up, their first instinct is to go back to acting the way they did before they were frozen. In the case of 80's guy from Futurama, that means trying to play the market. And for him, it's all about manipulation. Things don't have inherent value. Rather, they are only as valuable as what people are willing to pay for them. And so if you can convince someone else that what you have is worth more than what it actually is, you can sell it for a huge profit. And he doesn't really consider friendship to be valuable at all. He's just using Fry as a means of taking over control of Planet Express so he can eventually sell it off for a huge sweet payday. The capitalist from The Next Generation, on the other hand, is very eager to get on the phone, which is quite funny in the context of Star Trek, so he can talk to all of his very important people who he is sure to remind us multiple times are very important. His lawyer comes from a very important firm, and his business is very, very important. Far more important than Picard's silly military career. After all, his finances are on the line. He seems to think that all of this money gives him prestige, which in turn gives him social capital, which means that he's more important than all the other people on the ship. And as a result, he completely ignores the rules and acts as though he can do whatever he wants. He gets on the intercom and demands Picard's attention like a whiny toddler until eventually he capitulates and comes in to talk to him. Picard is frustrated by Offenhouse's focus on his material possessions, and he says, "Hey man, you gotta get used to the future. We don't do that here anymore." And Offenhouse says, "It's not about stuff, it's about power, because power gives you control over your life." And Picard says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Any control you think you have is just an illusion." To which Offenhouse retorts, "Oh yeah? Well, why am I standing here then? Because only the rich were able to afford this cryo-freezing technology, and it worked. I'm here. Your doctor cured my disease. The poors back in my time certainly didn't have access to this." This makes Picard a bit more sympathetic to his situation, but at the same time, this isn't really a battle between 2 different individuals and their interpersonal relationships. It's more of a stand-in where Picard represents Gene Roddenberry's vision for the future, and Offenhouse represents a sort of modern-day captain of industry. Back in Futurama, 80's guy, who's never actually given a name, is put in charge of Planet Express after a shareholder with just 1 vote decides to be the tiebreaker after she's tired of Farnsworth not coming over to pet her cat or something like that. Anyway, he completely ignores the business, which he doesn't care about, and decides to splash out on public appearances and advertising in order to increase the public's perception of the company so the stock price will go up. After which he arranges a deal with Mom's Delivery Service, who's a recurring character in the show and also a shady capitalist just like him, in which she agrees to buy out Planet Express for a price that will net them all a small fortune. This of course means that Planet Express will be shut down and the regular cast won't be working together anymore, and they'll all go about their own lives, presumably living it up in the life of luxury. However, Fry is upset by this because it will mean losing his friends who are more important to him than money. After 80's Guy dies of bone-itis because he was so busy being 80's Guy that he didn't bother to go and get the cure, which was readily available, Fry ends up taking over and sabotages the deal, somewhat knowingly and somewhat on accident. The Planet Express crew is upset, thinking that they could have been rich, but ultimately this wasn't about them, it was about Fry. This whole episode centers around him and his personal discovery that his friends mean more to him than money. It is essentially a paint by numbers, the real treasure was the friends we made along the way kind of story, and in that way it is a bit weak. On the other hand, even though there seems to be more substance to the TNG episode, I do have a little bit of an issue with the fact that Offenhouse isn't really rebutted based on the merits of his position, but rather that circumstances have changed. Picard's argument really seems to be material scarcity isn't really a thing anymore, therefore you have to adapt, rather than your way of thinking isn't beneficial to the greatest number of people. Because if material scarcity still existed in the time of Star Trek TNG, would that mean that he was justified in hoarding all of his wealth in order to become more powerful than everyone else? I get that it was 1988 and there was only so much they could do for a general audience, and I still appreciate what they did here, but they did pull some punches, at least in terms of the economic arguments. Overall, though, let's talk about which one did it best, and I think the winner has to go to TNG. Simply because even though the Futurama episode was quite funny, and it did give a moment of personal growth to Fry, and some of the best Futurama episodes were of that type, I think that Star Trek really took an opportunity to take a 1988 audience, to sit them down, to put some stand-in characters for the audience, and then through the plot of the show, have the hero characters like Picard explain to them how a different future might be better if they could uncouple their way of thinking about how the world works and imagine a future society in which there was no hunger, there was no greed, and all the children knew how to read. Star Trek was simply more ambitious here, and even though both episodes have their flaws, I think they executed it better, so I'm giving the win to TNG. If you've been cryogenically frozen since the late 20th century and you're not sure what to do, I recommend hitting the like button. And don't forget to subscribe so you can see the rest of my Trekmas videos. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.